Para falar sobre o modelo Y, onde produto, canal e experiência se encontram, vai vir um convidado que fala muito para o meu coração, porque eu traduzo os textos dele já há muito tempo para a revista E-Commerce Brasil. Ele é graduado em letras pela Universidade Sorbonne de Paris, tem especializações em gestão de projetos e de finanças pela Universidade de Chicago, ocupou cargos C-level em diversas empresas de grande porte, como Edelman, Harrison Group, Kimberly-Clark, até chegar na Philip Morris International na Suíça. Há pouco mais de 6 anos, ele é um estudioso do comportamento de consumo no e-commerce brasileiro, é um colunista fixo da revista E-Commerce Brasil e palestrante recorrente no Fórum desde 2017. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Anthony Long, the Global Head of Consumer Engagement for Smoke-Free Products at Philip Morris International. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Long.
Hello. Bom dia. And that is as far as my Portuguese goes, unfortunately. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank my dear friends and family at E-Commerce Brazil for having me back again. I want to thank all of you who've stopped me and shared with me that you appreciate some of the things we've been talking about in the future shopping column in E-Commerce Brazil. And I think the most important thing for us to remember here is that I've spoken at a lot of e-commerce conferences around the world. But since 2019, I've stopped speaking at all the other conferences except this one. And I don't create content for any other organization outside of this one. And the reason why is because of you and because of what's happening out there on the conference room floor. A lot of the best innovation that I see happening in e-commerce with payments, with the way that AI is being embraced and questioned, is happening here. And so it's really important for me to be able to come down here every year, have my conversations, meet new friends, meet old friends, and really advance the thinking and the way that we do e-commerce. So now, having said that, I don't really want you to become disappointed. You may be a little bit underwhelmed because what we're going to talk about here today is not terribly technologically exciting. It's not really very profoundly innovative, and it was not created with AI, exception of that picture up there, which was most definitely created by AI. But the reason why I'm here, and the reason why I'm excited to be here, is because what we're going to talk about today is big. It is a change in how you think and how you act in your business when you're running digital marketing. It is a non-trivial undertaking, and it's something that I think once you get your arms around the conversation we're going to have today, you'll be able to find ways to apply it in your business and where you work. Now, here's the thing. Even with high-performing teams that are working together on a project, you will always have issues. Companies are organized around different teams that are focused on one aspect of an overall picture, and they rely upon a handoff. And so even if you have really good, high-powered teams, there are always issues that come up. Sometimes things happen. And it's not just large companies. All companies work like this. They have a series of processes that have to happen, then a handoff, then another series of processes that have to happen. And this is the basis of a lot of management theory, where they track the process around, except they're not really focused on the actual activities of the team. They focus on that 10% where the handoff happens, right? And when you do this, you end up building silos. Now, silos happen when you have different teams responsible for different parts of a process, and they have this very small connection along the top, which is where the handoff takes place, right? But silos usually lead to infighting. And the reason why it's that way is because you have something that happens in the traditional way of working. You have something where when you have autonomy within a team, it feels pretty good. You're working with people that you work with every day. You develop relationships with them, you develop a point of view and a focus, and you don't necessarily feel that great about handing off to another team. And so these silos build because people tend to want to take things for their own and to take it over the finish line all by themselves. Maybe there's a lack of trust, maybe the systems are in place that don't necessarily facilitate the handoffs, but it's a very real reality, and it happens in almost every company. And so the way that I prefer to think of it is more like choreography, where there's a unity of purpose, right? And the idea is that when you have everybody working for a single goal, and it's across all of the different functions that are needed to execute on an initiative, you have something that works as a unit. Now, even if one of these dancers steps out of line and makes a wrong step, nobody knows, because for the audience, perhaps that was intentional, or perhaps it wasn't, but nobody really has any understanding of it, and the bottom line is, at the end of the performance, everybody is happy, they clap, and they've had a good singular experience. And even with these guys up here, you have 4 people on a stage. Each one of them are doing something very different than the others. These guys aren't even faced in the same direction. They're all over the place, but what they turn out is a single consumer experience, the music that they're playing. And so then this brings us to the why model. Now, for companies of any size, you have 3 basic drivers. You have the brand, you have the product, and then you have channels. And they almost always operate independently of each other. You have the brand, and these people are all up in the clouds coming up with brand new adjectives and gerunds to define what the company is all about. Then you have product, and product usually innovates, and usually it's for the sake of innovation. I've never met a product team, whether it's a digital product or whether it's a physical product, that does not have continual innovation. Okay? And then finally you have the channels. And channels have been the aspect of company that has undergone the most change since 2000. Channels are still trying to figure out their own digital transformation. They don't have that figured out yet. And so the way that this manifests itself in a large company is you have the product work stream, and you have the brand work stream, and then you have sort of this smattering of channels at the bottom. And product and brand leverage different channels at different times based on their own needs. And what happens is the consumer sees what they see, and it's a partial picture at best. They're not getting the whole picture of what the company might want them to see. Now, we're at E-commerce Brazil. What does this have to do with e-commerce? I'll explain. In this disconnected environment, the channels that are leveraged are not necessarily connected at all. And so e-commerce becomes a double click down from what the consumer, from what the company's trying to execute on. You may remember last year at the forum we had our conversation around think, feel, and do. And we discussed how important it is for e-commerce to elevate itself to become an experiential channel. And this situation is what prevents that. So when you visualize the why model, I mean, I could have made it look like a peace sign or a Mercedes logo, but they have their own sort of interpretational baggage. But the most important part of the why model is that why, in English, is a very important question. So the 3 parts of the why model, on the product or the service, it really can be anything. It can be a digital-only type of offering. It can be shampoo. It can be bread, whatever a consumer is buying, right? Now, the brand is the definition of, the brand work stream defines the qualities of the brand that are being exercised by the product, how the product's evolutions and expressions are supporting the brand promise. And then you have channels, and channels are there to deliver the experience for the consumer. And this is where the consumer is compelled to take action. Now, this part in the middle is where the consumer experience actually happens. And if you unite the work streams of product and brand with the channels, you're able to deliver to the consumer an experience that is meaningful, that is memorable, and that will create loyalty for the brand and the product that will continue to endure and build on itself. And getting this right helps us solve a lot of the problems that we all deal with in our day-to-day life. So you have the product team, and they've figured out how they can personalize the product, either for a cohort or down to the individual person. So they run off to the sales guy, and they go, hey, 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 go to your key account and tell them we can personalize this for them. Okay, the main question you must always ask, especially in digital marketing, is now what? Because a consumer's life, according to the way that they operate through mobile and digital touchpoints, never stops. So your campaign may have a defined end, but the consumer's life continues on. So if you're going to do something with a product, with a certain product innovation, you'd be best served to add to it the brand pillar that it supports, as well as weaving in the right channels that will bring impact. And when you get into things like channel innovation and incorporating AR into a campaign or even making it the main focus of the campaign is really just channel innovation. So in this case, this is a company called the Yorkshire Tea Company. And their brand promise is, we like to do things properly. They're English. They're very, very English. They really support cricket, which I don't understand. And their message is that they understand the importance of the environmental ecology, as well as the strength of the farmers that grow their tea, because the ecology is part of their supply chain. So they want to send the message using AR that they're going to plant over 1.5 million trees in Kenya with their 4,000 tea farmers that they have contracted with. Now, this is a great execution from an AR standpoint, but where they kind of fell down is they didn't follow through with a now what. What is the consumer supposed to do now that they have this information? And so it's important for you to really take things all the way through. Having said all of this, the guiding principle of the Y model is that any of these three streams needs to be on the project. And if the project does not include the active participation of these streams, this project is incomplete and should be stopped until we get everybody engaged. Now, this is much easier said than done because people's personalities don't necessarily compel them to be generous to everybody else around them, right? It really goes against human nature, especially in large corporations. So what you want to do is you want to really imbue this into your organization from the very beginning. So breaking down each of the three work streams. Product, whether it's a product or a service, there's always a base portfolio that serves as the underpinning of what the company does, right? Then you have new innovations, and these innovations may extend the existing base portfolio, or it may branch the company off into a different activity or product that it wants to pursue. And then finally, you also usually have limited editions, and these limited editions are there, for strategic purposes to capture a moment in time or a particular consumer's need. The way the brand works, it starts with a brand promise, and this brand promise is the statement internally, it's usually not consumer-facing, of what the company wants for itself, and it's supported by specific pillars. And then you have your brand voice, how the brand sounds in the mind of the consumer. This is not the words that you use, or the pictures that you use, but it's the way that you want the consumer to think and feel as they walk away and as they maintain, a mental image of your brand in their mind. And then finally, you have your brand position. Now, the brand position is how your brand exists in the lives of consumers. And it's not limited to just competitors. Because anything in this day and age, thanks to mobile, can be a competitor. Anything that is competing for your attention. Now, channels. Normally, companies look at channels from the standpoint of efficiency, right? How much am I getting for what I'm paying? But what you should do is you should pursue impact first. And the reason why I'm sharing this picture of our dearly departed Ayrton Senna taking a lap at Monaco is because when you are in a Formula One race, the minute those lights go out, you want to be as fast as you possibly can without regard for anything else. But then over the course of the lap, you're making constant adjustments. You're finding out ways to make the car operate more efficiently so that you're getting the most energy from the back tires that you possibly can. And if you guys remember 2 slides ago, the picture of all the different products from Apple over the course of their sort of lifetime. We think of products as being part of an ecosystem. Apple certainly has done that, right? But what I think we all here need to push and impress upon with our companies is that we have to think of channel as being part of an ecosystem. Consumers have more and more ways of accessing information and education about your company than ever before, especially if it's content and information that you did not create, but it's created by third party or by other consumers. And so your approach to channel needs really to be organized around the concept of an ecosystem and how these different channels relate to each other. And this is a great opportunity as well for you to think about an always-on investment balancing approach to channels. What are you doing with these channels? How are you balancing them? Which channels are you using when you're introducing, when you're starting things off? And then which channels do you fall back to once you're up and running? So if you consider your annual promotion plan, right? You have along the top line your incidental things. They happen at different times in the calendar. And then along the bottom, you have your very predictable, sort of like seasonal types of promotions, right? And this is generally speaking how companies tend to approach these things. But when you're doing your annual promotion planning, you really have 3 questions you have to answer. First, is this a regular line product? Or is this a limited edition opportunity we're going to pursue here? Next, which of our brand pillars is the right one for us to emphasize for this particular campaign? They don't always have to be the same one. You might find some of them work better at different times. And then finally, which channels are we using to drive and which channels are we using to support? So many of you remember the concept from business school of pulses and triggers. Pulses are those things that happen naturally in the lives of consumers, and triggers are those things that you as a company, as a brand, as a product, are pushing out to the consumer, right? The Y model ensures that these triggers and pulses are as fully realized as possible and that they fit into the natural rhythm of the consumer. And so what you want to do, first of all, is define the moments that matter for your consumers. And it doesn't have to be all consumers. It should be a cohort, a very specific cohort that you want to reach out to. Because nobody reads your emails. Even if your emails are extremely well written and very entertaining, unless there's a compelling reason for a consumer to want to open that email, it's probably not going to happen. Your reasons to reach out to the consumer are usually not about the product, but they could be, right? And so sometimes you need a reason to shout, and sometimes it's about the product, but sometimes it isn't. And channels, across all of these reasons to reach out to consumers, the brand voice has to be consistent, and the channels have to make these activations real in the consumer's life. And then finally, you have to seize opportunities as they come. You may not be able to achieve great scale for every initiative, for every campaign you want to do. But what you do want to push on is the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. And that's one of the most important things you can do when you're considering how you're going to leverage channels for an initiative. And this is the one key word. It's about amplification across all the relevant channels. But it's not just about amplification. It's about amplification with distribution. So you go back to your audience, you go back to the cohort of people that you're trying to reach and determine which of these channels are the right one for us and then which message you want to send and how you want to communicate it. So then this brings us back to e-commerce and e-commerce's role as part of the channel ecosystem, right? Because the e-commerce experience can be expanded to go beyond sales. You can deliver non-transactional engagements at the transactional level. You know, this is not about having a better product listing page or a better product detail page. You can go onto Google and you can find any number of top 10 improvements you can make to your PDP. But what we're talking about here is reaching out to the consumer in ways after the transaction is done, and incorporating this feedback loop from the consumer back into the company after they've made a purchase. An example might be offering a specific consumer of a specific level of value to the company a chance to join a product testing group. Or you could invite them, you could give them an early invitation or an opportunity to go to a specific exclusive event. There's a lot of things you can do that will help e-commerce deliver consumer delight. Now, in previous forums, we've talked about, I think it was maybe even 2017, we talked about the idea that a consumer journey is never linear, it's never clean. It's more like a mosquito. You don't know where the mosquito is going to land, and you don't know when the mosquito is going to land. But it will land at some point, and you as a company have to be ready for it. And this notion of feeding back in is where your channel ecosystem comes in. And all of this ladders up to one simple reality, and that is that in a marketing team, nobody is secondary. Everybody on the team has a role to play across the brand, the product, and the channels. And they all have a job to do, and kind of like that band, or kind of like those dancers, if they're doing that job effectively, if they're doing it with care, if they're doing it with intention, then you will develop consumer experiences that are truly meaningful, and consumer experiences that will build brand loyalty. And by focusing then on where these three work streams meet, you'll create this memorable experience. And then not only will you create that experience, but you'll also develop internal harmony across the different work streams, so that people begin to expect that rather than being three teams that are responsible for delivering one outcome, it's one team that is responsible for delivering an entire year's worth of outcomes. And this simple change of perspective is what will really drive vast improvements in how a company operates, as well as vast improvements in how the consumers regard the company and the products, and it will begin to elevate the role of e-commerce from being the end to being a continued part of the beginning, a continued renewal. So last week, I read this article about this philosopher in the New Yorker magazine. And he said something that I thought was really, really good and appropriate for what we're talking about here. And so I'm going to actually just flat out, I'm going to read this to you. The sound of a cello in a Schubert trio isn't entirely in the cello where the sound begins. Or it's not entirely between my listening ears, where the experience of structured sound happens, but it's somewhere between the two, where the creation of meaning takes place. Because that's what the consumer is looking for. The consumer is looking for meaning. Meaning in the lead-up, meaning in the experience, and meaning in the final transaction that they're looking for. They're looking for meaning from you. So this notion of the why model was something that I developed when I was at my last company. We implemented it, and it began to really give us some good results, give us some vast improvements in how we're doing things. Now in my current job, it's time for us to bring it back in again. We've been 5 years building a good, solid marketing capability team, and now I think it's time for us to bring it back in. And you'll be able to see in future editions of Future Shopping how it's going to go. And with that, I thank you very sincerely for your time and attention.
Thank you. People is the key. No? Anthony, thank you for the enriched presentation. Amazing. Your insights into breaking down silos and focus on unified consumer. And customer experience. They are truly inspiring and practical for many organizations today. Amazing, thank you. But now we have time for a few questions. Good? Can you elaborate on how companies can start implementing the Y model, especially in organizations where traditional siloed structures are deeply entrenched?
Yeah, so the way to approach it is to really think about your digital marketing life not campaign by campaign, but as a series of steps along a singular journey that lasts for a fiscal year. And so the way then is to approach life not from the job of each department, but how each department contributes to one job. And this is where we go into making sure that we are integrating brand and product and channels in all things from the very beginning. Because even if there's a lesser role for one of those three, as long as they're represented and they're able to add to the potential of what the project is, you're only going to come out with a better result. You're only going to do it.
Amazing. Do you have any example of companies that have successfully transformed their channels into holistic consumer engagement platforms?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good one. Because the idea is that think about our lives as consumers, right? And think about how much of your time is ruled by your mobile phone. That phone is really just a conduit for all these different information sources. And so if you respect how a consumer lives and how they behave, and we're all consumers, we all know this, we may just not think about it in these terms. But if you respect how a consumer lives, it gives you a much better way of embracing the roles of channels, which then can ladder back up to which brand promises you're putting in, and then how are we regarding product for these specific ones.
Great, great. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing your expertise with us today. Your presentation has given us a lot of think about and implementing our work. And one moment to finish now, to express our gratitude, I'd like to invite Natalia.
My F, I got an F.
To the stage to present your token of appreciation to Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you very much.